device, which is actually a phone that is, it's really more of a diabetes management handheld that you can make phone calls on versus a phone call that you can use to manage diabetes. So they've actually got 3 different cohorts that they're looking at.
So the data will be reported against control arms.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So and I'd like to open up. Is there any questions from the audience? If you could step up to the microphone, please. Okay. Well, while we're waiting, I do have a couple of other questions, and I think that this is, when we sit in presentations like this, it's very impressive, and I sit there and I think, wow, we should just roll this out. Everybody should be doing this. But then the real world comes in, and there are a lot of people who say, looks good on the screen, but getting it to work in the field, it's not going to work. So, what do you say to the people who are out there, the cynics, the naysayers? How do you respond to them? And Serge, do you have a?
I think, look, the best thing you can do is let them try the application and say, wow, right? And, some people are easier to impress than others, but at the end of the day, you always have to get them into the mindset of, into their head as, how they behave and how they act as consumers. No matter what title they have and what position in the company, they're consumers and users at the end of the day. And if you can create the right experience for them and they say, wow, this works for me, and they start, thinking about their family members, then they can certainly, kind of expand it into their business. So at least that's how we approach it.
And Jeff, I know you can't give a cupcake to everybody in the world. So I mean, what do you say?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing is, and we've really seen almost a seismic shift in thinking over really the last 6 months, and especially I think it coincides with the passage of the healthcare reform bill. And whether you think that's the greatest bill in the world or the worst thing that ever happened to America, the one thing it's doing is it is changing behavior. And if I go back a year ago and I would be talking to a physician or someone from a hospital or a health system and talking about the use of a personal health record and mobile devices for chronic disease management, that would come up occasionally. Now it comes up in almost every single conversation, and I think people recognize that the traditional fee-for-service delivery model is on the decline. And in the future, it's all about better management of chronic care, reducing hospital readmissions, just doing a better job of prevention and wellness. And it goes by all sorts of names: health coaching. We're going to become an accountable care organization. Whatever label you put on it. The world is shifting, and what we're finding is all of a sudden, not that people are saying, should we do this? It's, oh my God, we have to do this. Help us figure out a model that we can put in place.
Okay, we do have a question.
Philosophy around PHI and standard text messages.
When you say, I understand the PHI question, the standard text messaging, what do you mean by that?
Meaning that you're potentially giving protected health information through a message that's not secure or encrypted or password protected.
Okay, so when I look at, people ask us, are you plugged into Google Health and Microsoft Vault? And I've tried all of these applications, and in my opinion, it's not ready for the mass consumer market yet. And as a startup, we have to prioritize, so it's not a priority at this point for us. In terms of privacy and text messaging, there is a technological way to make it, bulletproof, but that requires so many steps that consumers will never do it. So basically, the way we are executing things in hospitals, it's all opt-ins. I mean, everything is obviously securely, stored and encrypted and all of that. But and we give people tips on our website. Please, for example, make sure that you have a screen protector with a password on your phone. Those kind of things. But ultimately, there really is no bulletproof way for text message. You can download a thin client, but it becomes a nightmare.
Okay, another question.
Thanks for your presentations. Jeff, my mother's hip is from Fort Wayne, so thank you. Serge, I have a question. You mentioned partnerships with the pharmaceutical industry. How do you handle the appropriate dissemination of risk information?
How do we handle the, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
The sending out the appropriate risk information.
Well, again, so the way we execute our programs, it's basically we let the patients sign up through an open, web interface or through a website, basically. So they opt into the terms and conditions, and the only really personal information we collect is the cell phone number.
No, I mean the risk information for the drug product.
Oh, again, the way we've executed this one is we let them right now. We don't pre-populate any of the data, so patients enter their own drugs. So again, it's all user-generated
So,
content.
Could you talk a little, what I'm talking about is if you have sponsorship with pharmaceutical industry.
Correct.
And the pharmaceutical industry is responsible for.
So you like black box labeling and stuff?
Well,
like
any type of messaging that it sends out to consumers with its product name requires safety information. Does your partnership rise to that level?
So like what I said, so we did not pre-populate the brand name into the date in order to avoid that issue right now because it's still pretty gray. Because it all started with the whole one-click issue with Sanofi Aventis, what, a year and a half ago, right? So basically, if a patient enters, whatever they enter, whatever brand name, the burden is on them. So it doesn't really, it's more positioned as an editorial content.
Right. So what is, I mean, relative to partnerships with the pharmaceutical industry, what is that?
Well, basically, the way we executed the one that I mentioned in Everyday Health, it's an editorial content play, and we're offering it as a tool for self-management of medication self-management. So again, there is no reference to the brand other than the banner ad, and then we believe that that's a way to avoid that potential issue with the FTC and FDA.
So let me just understand that. So it's you're just limiting yourself to a promotional association with the pharmaceutical company, so they wouldn't have that disclosure information.
Right. So what happened? I believe you're talking about the mail letters that came in 2009. It was for one-click through banner ads. Basically, anytime you had mentioned a brand name, you had to show that the black box warnings and so on and so forth. And it used to be that you could click through to another page, and then the warning letter said you can't do that. So all the legal departments, the pharma companies said, well, that now that applies to everything, including mobile. And therefore, what is the way around it? So there are ways around it. One of the things one could do is do a mobile, a multimedia mobile message, which basically would include, the alert and then on the bottom the other stuff. But it's a very impractical execution, and we've looked at another application that you could put up to 5,000 characters into a text message. But again, it requires actions by consumer that they will never do. So it's pointless. That's why if you look at our website, there's in the sponsored website in Everyday Health, the brand name is not mentioned at all anywhere, and we believe that kind of satisfy those requirements.
Other question?
Hi, my name is Jeff Chen. Thank you for the presentations. What are your thoughts on the FDA requirements or regulations on kind of your software and systems? Do they treat this, or what are your thoughts on how they believe, for both of you actually, how do they believe this is different or similar to maybe a more traditional medical device?
Well, I think the jury is still out. In fact, I talked last week with a gentleman who's involved in doing some lobbying for the with the FDA, and he said, they're still trying to catch up on this and figure it out themselves. And I'd love to sit here and say we know exactly what's going to happen, but we don't. I mean, it's one thing if you have a mobile device, if you have a phone that happens to have a blood glucose reader built into it, it's pretty clear that, okay, that's a medical device. But if a patient is simply, taking data off of a meter, either manually or entering it or bringing it in via Bluetooth and putting it on an application that then sends it somewhere else, does that mean that the phone is suddenly a medical device? Well, I can sit here and say I don't think it does, but we're going to have to wait and see which way they rule on that. The thing I would hope is that they don't stifle innovation, because all of a sudden now you've got, as this meeting is a testament to, you've got a whole industry that's growing up, and I'd hate for us to get a couple of years into this, start to see some really good results like we've talked about this morning, and then all of a sudden we come to a screeching halt and say, well, okay, your phone has to get 510K approval.
I'd just like to comment on that. It really depends what claims you're making, right? Because that's what it's all about. So if you look at some companies that have done great work in diabetes, like WellDoc, they need to get a 510K approval because they provide treatment, right? They give treatment advice. From our standpoint, CareSpeak, we've stayed away from providing any treatment advice. We're basically just giving people alerts and prompting them for certain action. And then if you